Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Carl Forehand, and we are continuing our podcast series, Good Questions, which are based on blogs that Carl has been writing, but there are also some questions that we had as we were deconstructing. And so we thought we would come on and discuss some of those.
Yeah, and so a lot of times when we're in discussions with people, they kind of ask this question to themselves, and some of these things you'll ask early on, some of them you ask later on in the process, but these are kind of the things that have boiled down, and so these are the most important ones.
Yeah.
But you hear this one a lot, I think.
Well, and before we jump into this question, I have been noticing a lot on social media, especially Facebook, with some of our online community of friends. Like some of these things that we're talking about are actually being discussed on various other platforms too. So it's interesting to me that so much of us are kind of talking about the same thing. Like it's almost like something has, is rearing its head and we need to really, really pay attention. So, but question number 5 is, what are the chances that the narrow tradition that I was raised in got everything exactly right?
Yeah, and so I guess kind of imagine that you're in a rural area, you're in a small town, you go to one of the few churches that are in town. So you weren't raised Buddhist, you weren't raised Muslim, you weren't Seventh-day Adventist, you're not something else, mostly because of where you're located, to the people you were in your family and the area you grew up in. Those things are going to matter more than anything, what type of church you end up in, most likely. When I came out of college and thinking about starting a family, I just looked for a church that was similar to the one I grew up in.
Right.
Hadn't thought about it for years or even put any effort into it. And it wasn't very scientific how I decided where I was going to go to church. It was just, and some people may have done more research and they might be more scholarly in that way. But for the most part, you end up in a belief system that was common to your upbringing.
Sure.
And convenient, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would say that was probably true of me as well, except that after we got married, I don't know why I deferred so much to you and your tradition, but I mean, that's just what happened.
Yeah. So I grew up in a Southern Baptist tradition from what I can remember. In junior high, we were in an independent fundamentalist Baptist church, and you don't know what that is, how that differs from a Southern Baptist. So Southern Baptists were created because there was a difference about slavery with the Northern or whatever that other branch of Baptist is called.
Yeah.
So they had a difference. So they formed their own convention, their own church. Independent fundamentalist Baptists would be connected to Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. They really highlighted that religion, along with Bill Gothard, who, even though he wasn't a father or even didn't even have a wife,
right,
he created the Institute in Basic Life Principles, which is a curriculum used by homeschoolers. So those two dysfunctional religions were what I adopted just because that was where I was at.
Right.
So to find out more about the IFB and the IBLP, Watch the documentary Shiny Happy People, and you know everything you need to know.
Yeah, that's very, very telling documentary.
Yeah, about how bad that was. So, you know, I remember being kind of smug as a Southern Baptist. We made fun of the Catholics because they had a lot of abuse scandals. Then later, Southern Baptists also had a bunch of abuse scandals. 700 youth pastors were accused of sexual misconduct,
Uh-huh.
and the executive board of the Southern Baptist Convention covered that up,
Mm-hmm.
blamed the victims, and claimed all the churches were autonomous. So that's where I grew up, and like I said, simply because that's where my parents were in the Bible
Mm-hmm.
Belt and deep in the South. That's where they were, so that's what they chose based on their parents and where they grew up. And it didn't really I didn't do an exhaustive search. I didn't find out what else was available, what other kinds of religions were available. We just chose that. Actually, that was probably chosen for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's what our parents did. That's what,
Right.
so that when we went to that church, we knew what was going to happen.
Right.
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 So when we talk about traditions and denominations, we assume that we have some problems, but we attend the one we think is the most right. So usually our friends or family members attend there and we want to be around them. It's part of it. We haven't spent much time investigating world religions or other faith practices, so we assume ours is the best and God's on our side. So whatever's happening there, there may be a few things that raise our eyebrows or we question a little bit, but for the most part, we assume it's the right one. And everybody does that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in Judaism, if you're in a Muslim, if you're a mainline Christian, if you're a Catholic, you assume yours is the best. And you might not even practice it. You might not even go to mass,
Right.
but you'll say I'm a Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's mostly because of where you're raised and who you're raised by,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I say there are systemic problems in religion, people respond, well, maybe in your church, but not so much in ours, right?
Right. Right. We heard that a lot.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry that happened to you, but that doesn't happen in our church.
Yeah, ours is better.
Right.
And mostly everybody feels that way when they might say, well, I know my denomination has some problems, but it's what we do, and it's my home place.
Right.
And a lot of times I can justify most of the things. So, um, what I believe about theology is the study or of forming assumptions about the belief system of specific religions. So, the doctrine of the Trinity, which is widely accepted in Catholicism and Protestantism, didn't become prevalent until the second century. And then it gradually attracted more adherents.
Mm-hmm.
Theologians represent scientists in some way, but their truths are derived from texts and established assumptions rather than direct observation or experimentation. So when one theologian proposes an assumption, it may be accepted and endure for centuries until a new version 2.0 of that philosophy is imagined by somebody else.
Right.
And when it's compelling enough, when it kind of ranks with people based on their life experience, then they will adopt it. And then that theologian makes a lot of money, or is very
Right.
popular,
Yeah.
that has a church with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But when this leads to a rift within the congregation, the group separates and establishes new churches and new denominations. In the Protestant realm, this explains why there's tens of thousands of denominations, and they all believe they're correct and
Right.
that God is on their side.
Right.
God supports them. So,
With no specific proof of that. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, because we've talked about it before, but it's like we all have our own interpretation of the Bible, so if we're relying on that to be what tells us that we're right and God is on our side, well, how many different versions of the Bible are there, interpretations of the Bible are there, but we can talk ourselves into believing whatever we want,
Yeah.
really.
And when we ask the question, if we ask it kind of scientific, like what are the what is the probability? Let's talk about statistics. What's the probability that my religion that I currently attend and support and volunteer for, what are the chances that they got it right and all the other ones got it wrong or got it less right than us?
Right.
And I would say, if you to be honest, then the chances of that being true are astronomical, because if there is one right denomination or one branch of Christianity or just even Christianity in itself, you still got 7/8 of the population that believe something else and believe yours is not right.
Right.
So I began to question the validity of the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, after examining its outcomes. So, observing the surroundings, I noticed several troubling issues. Denominational leaders and prominent pastors projected confidence, but their theological understanding seemed weak when challenged. Although they spoke assertively about God's sovereignty, they hesitated when faced with a straightforward follow-up question, such as, what about the victims of abuse? And how does that play with God's sovereignty? And they have trouble with things like that and tend to defer to the gods above us and we can't understand him argument.
Right. And I've seen a lot of that on a lot of these Facebook posts, like I was talking about. And, people that, are still like blaming the victim or saying that God is sovereign. And there's been a lot of pushback. And like one of the best pushbacks is like, so would you say that to a person that has been like sexually violated? And it's so easy to say how sovereign God is on Facebook and argue when you don't have to look somebody in the eye who has actually gone through the trauma of abuse.
Yeah. One thing that theologians do is they foster a reliance on their expertise. So audience members receive theology in a formulaic way, along with practical advice on how to live and what to believe. They're discouraged from independent thinking and asked not to pose too many questions. The organization takes priority, leaving little time for individual needs, inquiries, or concerns. So while leaders in churches resemble authoritarian figures in other countries, so let's say a church pastor kind of resembles a dictator in a way. And so when they resemble that, they oversimplify the concepts of the masses while insisting that congregants adhere strictly to their guidance. So just be quiet and listen to me. Get on the bus, get on the train. We got to get going here, and we're trying to preserve the organization. So that's kind of their posture is really, you shouldn't question me. I know Greg Locke says he's an idiot, but he says, it doesn't matter what I do, even if I make mistakes or get it wrong, you should still follow me. And so that's kind of the posture that leads to people just accepting whatever their denomination is, or their pastor or their church is projecting.
Right.
So I believe that leads to simplification of parishioners. And I kind of want to say that's a dumbing down of the congregation, but my editor on my the editing program on my word processor computer here didn't allow that. It didn't like that. So making them, it makes them more susceptible to control.
For sure.
Prioritizing organizational concerns and financial obligations overshadows individual needs, as the requirements of many are subordinated to those of the leaders, ensuring that the organization's survival and survives, with everything dependent on the affirmed beliefs that their members are urged to uphold. Safeguarding the doctrinal statement raises to the forefront of the priorities. So not only do you have the right doctrine, but you have to defend it. And when your leaders can't defend it, we're punting to all of these ideas like God's too far above us, we can't understand him, which may be true, that we can't understand him, but we just get in that same mindset as the leaders, because they're not defending it really. They're punting.
Right.
They're letting that slide. So anyway.
And then it goes back to the question, our question number 4, like, if God is so far above us that we can't understand, why wouldn't he have made things a little bit easier for us to understand so that we could, get it right? You would think that he would want that for his creation.
Yeah. So I was a pastor for about 20 years, and I finally paused to reflect and consider the questions posed in this blog. How can I be certain, after traveling the complex path of Christianity, that my denomination made all the correct choices and heeded the insights of the right theologians? So as I compare my congregation to the wider world, I frequently notice those they deem sinners on the outside of our walls often behave better than those within. So within Christianity, leaders have committed acts of molestation, rape, and substance abuse, and they far too often fall victim to greed, power, manipulation, and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to take just, the evangelical Christian church right now, which is not really a denomination, it's different denominations kind of make up that evangelical fundamentalist Christianity. Let's just put them in the spotlight and say, are you sure that yours is right? Because there's tons of bad fruit coming out of that right now.
Yeah, right.
There's bad behavior. There's, you still have the same problems with your doctrine that these other churches do. And it would be hard for me to say, well, this is the right one. God's on our side. We got it right. Because the people in Congress right now that are trying to change that, they're trying to make Christianity the religion of the United States, but they're talking about a specific kind of Christianity.
Yeah.
How do you know that specific kind of Christianity is even the right one?
Right.
Much less, maybe we need some truth from other places besides just Christianity, but they're in a specific type of Christianity that leads to white nationalism and things like that. So, you really got to ask that question. How likely is it that the branch I'm in is exactly right?
Right.
And God is on our side, not anybody else's. Even during the period when Christianity had about 6 primary schools of thought, the shifts we experienced were largely influenced by cultural changes rather than the universally accepted or acknowledged divine interventions. Remarkably, when Jesus is believed to have died on the cross, none of the contemporary historical authors mentioned the event until 60 years later. In my view, if we had truly embraced Jesus' message of loving our neighbors and committed ourselves to this principle, our world would likely be in a much better place. Many of the conclusions drawn by theologians were shaped more by desires for power, control, and cultural factors than divine inspiration. Emperor Constantine may have had a greater impact on Christianity than Jesus himself when he merged the church with the state in the 4th century. So anyway, um, my blog is kind of long here, but my decision to leave the pastorate and reevaluate my faith wasn't whimsical. I wasn't merely trying to indulge in sin or shirk my responsibility or reject my upbringing.
No, and I want to interject here because I feel like I was emotionally gone way before we left the church. Yeah. And you honestly tried to hang on for as long as you could, trying to evoke some change and some real,
to make some sense out of it.
Make some sense out of it.
I'm very loyal.
Yeah.
I tend to kind of hang on.
So it wasn't, I would 100% attest to that it wasn't just, you woke up one day and it was like, well, I think I want to do something else. Yeah.
I did finally come to that conclusion when I said, I can't do this anymore, and stepped down and stopped being a pastor and then started investigating. So when corruption was exposed in nearly every evangelical institution in the United States, it spurred me to question all assumptions and seek truth wherever it might be hidden. Nothing was deemed sacred, not just because it had persisted for hundreds or even thousands of years. Having gained significant insight into how things operated, and after deeply studying the scriptures for 20 years, I was ready to discard my long-held beliefs in favor of seeking actual truth rather than merely defending inherited beliefs. So as someone who has always had an interest in theology, I can imagine that a person might develop a belief about God or the afterlife. With practice, they could express this belief so convincingly that others would accept it. This phenomenon occurs daily across all kinds of organizations. Over time, as people become more entrenched in this belief, it increasingly transforms in their minds into an unchangeable or diminished idea. And so maybe I could just kind of say this new approach, this new twist on religion that you've discovered will likely not prove to be the ultimate truth.
Right.
It's likely that the discoveries we're making now will be refined over time as we discover new ideas and people do deeper research and those kind of things. So I've distanced myself from my denomination and I began my journey. I believe that the best approach to this process differs from Stephen Covey's idea of begin with the end in mind. Deconstruction isn't about confirming or refuting existing beliefs. It's about seeking the raw wisdom that's been preserved across various traditions. This is a rewarding journey of exploration, but it takes work and it takes time.
For sure.
If you feel compelled to remain within organized religion, think about embarking on a mystic's journey to truly experience the universe rather than merely accepting your group's established beliefs.
Yeah, that's a really good point to bring out. And if you go in with questions and you are met with resistance, I think you need to take a hard look at that, because if any religious organization becomes incredibly defensive because you're asking questions, I think you need to take a hard look at that.
Yeah. And that's this question is all about, is just to continue to ask that question, or maybe to start with that assumption that my tradition is probably at least partially wrong. There's very little chance that they survived the last 2,000, 3,000 years and got it exactly right.
All throughout those 2,000 or 3,000 years.
Right.
Yeah.
It's survived. And a lot of people say that sometimes they'll talk about well, this, this is the church's tradition. What about that? Like, that doesn't matter much to me at all. Because if Constantine changed something and we had to meet in bigger places and we had one person speaking and those kind of things and doing the things that make it mesh up with the church and state, and that still doesn't make it true, and it doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it correct, it doesn't make it the only way. And just because we say this is the only way doesn't make that true.
Right.
And the more fervent we got to get past that thing. If I believe something strong enough, it's true. Well, it's true if it's true,
Right.
not because of how fervently we defend it. I mean, you defend things you believe in, but you that doesn't mean you defend things that are true necessarily. You defend them because it works with you. And a lot of that's because, like we said in the beginning, it's where you were raised and who passed it on to you.
Right.
Those kind of things mean a lot to us as humans, and that's where we kind of make the mistake. I would say. Yeah.
I agree. Yep. So keep asking those tough questions, and if it's not allowed, then I think that raises another question of why are my questions not allowed?
And I would say when a question is not answered sufficiently, then keep that question and hang on to that question and keep asking it, even if you're not directly addressing someone. I think we do get answers, we do get insights, but you got to keep that question in the forefront of your mind. I think the little quote at the beginning of this blog said, can you read it?
Yeah. The master key of knowledge is indeed a persistent and frequent questioning.
Yeah. So, I mean, at some point, your pastor's going to cut you off and say, stop asking questions, or, they might say it in a different way, but the good things come when we keep asking questions, keep asking good questions. So
right.
I hope this helps. As always, want to encourage you to be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.